I'm a published author with one of the minor modern publishing houses, a company called Crooked Cat. Everybody knows Just a Minute. This isn't a competitive afternoon. Nobody's going to walk away with a new car or anything like that. But the idea is to have a little bit of fun and try and discover a little bit more about how we write our books and this sort of stuff, the problems sometimes that writers have. What literary pilgrimages have they been on? And we'll start at the same. Again, traditionally with Maggie.
Okay, no repetition or deviation.
No, at least not in terms of places, hopefully, but yeah.
Well, the one that comes to mind is when I was on holiday in Venice with my family, because I'd just been reading a book by Sally Vickers called Miss Garnet's Angel. It really struck a chord with me because Miss Garnet was a retired teacher of a certain age who decided that her life needed a bit of a shake-up, went to live in Venice for 6 months, had all kinds of experiences while she was there, largely connected with a stone angel she came across on a church close to where she was living. It was an image of the Archangel Raphael, and this was completely mixed up with all the stories. She thought she'd found love and all the rest of it. Wonderful story. But a lot of it was concerned with her walking around Venice, particularly from the centre to where she lived. And when I was there with my husband and our 2 boys, I decided we needed...
Thank you, Maggie.
Well, for me, I've never been on a physical pilgrimage at all, so mine are always the ones that happen in my head. The places that I read about become very real, and there'll be times that I will revisit those places. And I think perhaps one of the writers that I do that most often with is Thomas Hardy, because where I walk my dogs, the green lanes around where I live, it is so easy just to go back into his writing and his time and to feel that you are there and part of the story. So for me it's actually reliving the stories that I've read and loved wherever I happen to be as I read them.
What's your writing kryptonite? Superman has a weakness, and kryptonite is his weakness. What are our writers' weaknesses? And this time I'm going to start off with Marla.
Right. Well, my kryptonite is procrastination. I know that I've got to write. I know I have it in my head. I know the plot and I know exactly where I'm going to go. But do I sit down and actually get down to it? No. I'd rather do anything than actually sit down and get down to it. The dog needs walking. The garden needs digging, there's weeds growing by the back door, and the washing needs doing, and on it goes. I find all sorts of things not to do. And then finally, when I just cannot avoid it any longer, I sit down. And that's when my husband comes in and says, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And so there's another reason why not to carry on writing. And then this goes on for a couple of hours. Eventually, I do get down to it, and I do get lost.
Thank you. I'm pleased you got down to it.
I guess my Achilles heel is that when you're writing, you get immersed in the book, you get immersed in the characters, and actually you get to like some of the characters more than you do others. In fact, you get to loathe some of the characters as well. And I've got a tendency, when I like the characters, well, they figure more in the book than they should do, really. And I elaborate a lot more detail on the characters that I like than otherwise. I'm pretty disciplined when it comes to writing. I write most mornings, and I get up quite early, so I write most mornings for at least a couple of hours. Not too keen on the editing part of it. I think the editing part of it is every writer's hate. But it's surprising. I don't know how everybody else does it, but I go through it, and when I go through it to such a point that I'm not making any changes, then I stop. However, I never get to that point.
No.
Yeah. There's always one or two changes.
Always one more edit.
You do find that you're changing changes that you changed.
Yeah. You're concise as well. I'm impressed. Yeah. Kathleen, over to you.
I think mine is having too much time to do it, because I can procrastinate as well. Give me a deadline and I will sit down and do it. Give me a time when I must write a poem for this evening, and I'll just do it. I'll just sit there and immerse myself. But the minute I've got 3 weeks to do it, it's all right, because I can do it tomorrow. I can do it tomorrow. So that's really what holds me up. But also, a bit like everybody else, if I've got down to it and I'm sitting there and I'm working away, and somebody comes and says, "Will you just look at?" I lose the thread. So I do ban people, and I do say, "Out, leave me alone."
Deadlines are always a problem. I love the whooshing noise they make as they go flying past.
Ready to start again?
Yes, we will do indeed. Okay. The next subject is, what's the best way of marketing your book?
Poetry, I do recognise, is not everybody's thing. And so I think for me and for many other poets, the best way to sell your book is to do readings, to be at festivals, to be at events, and to read poems so that the poem makes sense to the listener. Because often when people who are not used to poetry just read it on the page, they don't get as much from it. You almost, and I'm not a performance poet particularly, and there are people who are, but I'm not. But even so, if you read your work and put the meaning into it that you intended, then actually people start to look at poetry differently. So certainly for me and for many other poets I know, we go to as many events as we can, we go to open mics, we read, and that helps to sell.
Rosemary.
I have a love-hate relationship with Amazon.
Oh, you too, eh?
I do a lot of advertising through, and it is very effective. But in some ways it's another form of word of mouth as well, because the reviews, if you've got good reviews, then people will look and think, "Oh, I'll try that."
Yeah.
But there's nothing more gratifying than hearing from a complete stranger somewhere a long way away and having no idea how they ever heard of you.
Yeah.
And in one case I did a book group recently where I tried asking them, this was in Tennessee in America, I'd done it by video link, and a friend had given her the book, and I still don't know how her friend had heard about it, and then the book group read it. So word of mouth is huge, but there's the modern word of mouth, which is social media, Amazon, different forms
And
of
the review
advertising.
things,
And the review things.
go with it.
Yeah.
Do you think that someone can be a writer if they don't feel emotionally involved with the story that they're writing?
Well, non-fiction, not so much. I do write a lot of that, but my fiction, yes, I get very emotionally involved because a lot of it is inspired either by something that's happened to me or something that happened to somebody way back in my family. My latest book is all about a little lad who was sent up from a London workhouse to the Yorkshire coal mines and actually married one of my great aunts. I got very, very emotional about writing scenes from his childhood. I was actually to be seen sobbing over my computer at times, just thinking how awful it must have been. So yes, the answer is yes. If it's something very personal to me, I get very emotional. Other times I can be fairly detached.
I think you have to have empathy for the characters that you're writing. But I think it depends on what you're writing, really, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about it, if you're writing a biography, do you get emotionally involved with the person that you're writing about?
You have to care about them.
Yeah,
He's telling
you
the
have
truth,
to care, but
your
do you-
truth
yes,
about them.
but do you have to feel a really strong emotion towards them? I think you have to be neutral and unbiased and be able to stand back a little bit and not get involved. And I think that's when you look at the different kinds of writing that there are, like travel writing. Do you have to get emotionally involved, or do you stand back and give observe rather than? But I think when it comes to poetry, I don't write anywhere near the amount of poetry that Kate does, but occasionally I do have flashes of words that come into my mind. And it has to be hard.
I know my old headmaster had this thing, he was really keen on the word disinterested. It basically meant interested but not biased.
Yeah.
And that really sort of sums it up. You do need to be interested in what you're writing about. Do you view writing as a kind of spiritual practice. I'm tempted, I'm not going to start with Kathleen here, because being a poet, as soon as one mentions spiritualism in this particular context, Rosemary.
I have a motto for my writing, which is challenging thinking through writing. And what I want my books to do is to make people think, often about an issue, about something a little bit deeper. So if I have readers come back to me and say, that's made me look at something differently, that's made me question something, to me, yes, I've done something worthwhile. That, and what I really love, is to feel one day one of my literary heroes would pick up one of my books and look at it and think, yes, this is good. And that's what I'd aim to.
It's difficult to say, really. It depends on what your definition of spiritual is. I think the other half of writing is researching. And when I was researching for the book that I've written, I had to do a lot of research on the afterlife, on purgatory, the medieval mind, what they believed in, and that kind of thing, to project a character's mindset. And I found myself reading all sorts of religious texts. So in that sense, I think when you get sucked into researching things that are spiritual, it can't help but be a spiritual sort of experience.
Yeah.
Spiritual? Well, it depends on how you look at the word spiritual, I suppose. For me, writing poetry is a relaxation. It does take you out of yourself. It is something that you have to give a fair amount of thought to. It doesn't just flow. So in a way, I suppose it does take over from all the daily woes and worries, which in a way is spiritual, because it does give you the opportunity to do something quite different. So yes, I think in a way it is spiritual, but maybe not in the way that many people would think about it.
I would say not. Along the lines that Marla's just said, I have had to look up things like the words to the Hail Mary, but it hasn't had any impact in reading it. But sort of looking back at poetry, funnily enough, not relaxing for me. The last poem that I wrote was one out of frustration and anger, rather than, which was the Second English Civil War, about Brexit, which I've written recently. But generally, no. I think the only way I might describe it as spiritual is just the whole putting myself into their worlds and just life in a different dimension in that regard, but not in any spiritual journey as a personal thing.
All of us have sort of, if you like, background baggage in what we read, and how what we read has sort of formatted what we like to write, and the sort of styles that we like to write in, and this sort of thing. But who is, or who are, should I say, your favourite authors? Matt, gee. Favourite authors?
Joanne Harris is one, because a lot of my work is set in France. I've spent a lot of time there. I used to teach French, and I love the way that she describes the countryside, the people, the cuisine, just about everything. Terry Pratchett, the late great Terry Pratchett, because I loved his sense of humour and his different slants and all sorts of things that we took for granted, and then he turned them upside down. And most recently, Diana Gabaldon, because I've read every one of her Outlander series and can't wait for the final one to come out to see what happens in the end. I think they're wonderful, the time frame she uses, the characters, the amazing amounts of research that's gone into it all.
Again, I will say I'm a grumpy old man, as a result of which I don't like being led by the nose by the top 20 in Waterstones, so I tend to have an eclectic choice of books. If we look at a famous author, I also like Terry Pratchett. I read him before he was super famous, and what I like about him is he takes logic to its extreme and then a little bit further, but also he writes well. It's a real work of art sometimes. And I've been in some of the stories, and you can feel it. Obviously, I like Tolkien. Tolkien is the start of this, and I was reading that, when I was quite young, before it was really very popular in what it is now. But since I've been a member of PYA, I've read quite a few PYA authors as well. Karen Perkins, I read her set of the Valkyrie series about it's very buccaneer type pirates in the Caribbean. I haven't read a book like that in a long time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
The last question I've got on my cheat sheet today, but we are open for other questions as well in a moment. Writing is famously a very much a solitary occupation, and you can sit there, you can write away, and you can tell yourself how wonderful your book is and all the rest of it, because we do it. That's what we do all the bloody time. So does having a big ego help or hinder the writer?
Does it help? I think if you want to persuade people to read your work or to buy your work, you have to have belief in it, and perhaps belief in it is having an ego. You have to think it's good, because how will you ever persuade anybody else that it's good?
You have to
if
believe
you
in what
don't
you're
believe
doing.
in it. So I think a bit of ego does help a little bit, but you haven't to get too much above yourself, do you? Otherwise. But a little bit I think helps.
Yes, I think we agree there.
Maggie?
Well, you certainly haven't to go over the top with ego. I write a lot of magazine stories, and sometimes I get notes from an editor wanting things changing, which I don't agree with. Or she'll ask me, do you mind if which doesn't usually ask actually, I'll change the title because I think this one's better. And I may disagree, but I want to see it in print. I have to pay lip service. But is ego the same thing as personality? I think if you have a fairly outgoing personality and you can project what you've been doing and try and convince your audience that it's worth reading, that's a very positive thing.
Thank you.
We've reached the end of the questions we had sort of lined up beforehand. Do we have anything from the audience that they'd like to ask? Anything at all? Yes, please, at the back.
I was very interested when you said that you'd been trying to get into a sort of spiritual medieval mindset. Obviously you're doing that to write the characters in your story, but do you find that rubbing up with their ideas, some of it rubs off onto you and you start looking at the present world through that mindset?
One of the things, if you're writing today about historical events and this sort of stuff, the time scale is totally different. We nipped down to London from York, 2 hours on the train. Now, if you're going to go down in a stagecoach, it would be about 3 days down the Great North Road. And if you were going in, literally by horse and cart, it might take you a week. It might take you several weeks if you were just walking and sleeping in the hedges and this sort of stuff. And like I said, life was hard, nasty, brutish and short. Even when you got to London, you weren't likely to live very long. It was a rapacious city then, probably as much as it is now, if you like. And I hope no one's going to get any tickets from Tesco's or anything like that. I would like to thank our panel for coming along today, and also for Northallerton Library for hosting us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and I hope to have you again soon.
Thank you very much.